children lost, ensnared by a witch's binding spell. Jessii, the awakened soul, yearns to escape and find a new home. Dare you join her and explore more?
Let's get into this video about shadows. Just think back to your own childhood and the time when you first discovered your own shadow. You might remember how this black figure which followed you around, constantly imitating your behavior. It seemed like a wondrous thing. Because it imitates life, many children think that shadows are actually living beings, especially when you're super young because it's hard to understand. I've seen so many videos online of like little babies and little toddlers seeing their shadow for the first time, and it terrifies them. So before I get into a horrifying creepypasta, we're gonna talk a little bit about shadow superstitions. Some people think that shadows are a representation of the soul, or even a manifestation of the soul itself. The ancient Greeks believed that whomever entered the sanctuary of Zeus on Mount Lycaeus would lose his shadow and therefore was doomed to die within the year. The Greeks definitely thought that your shadow contained your soul, and that no one could live very long once that soul was separated from the body. So if you don't see your shadow one day, you might die soon. People think that if you drop something and it breaks over top of your shadow, your soul would be harmed. Hundreds of years ago, the shadow was even used as some sort of witch doll or voodoo doll. They would try to prick someone's shadow with a spear or a sword to actually cause that victim great pain, which is super messed up to me. Another very weird practice that comes from history is from southeastern Europe. The people of Greece sometimes use shadows as a sacrifice when the foundation of a new building is being laid. This can be done by laying the foundation stone upon a man's shadow. This sacrifice is believed to give stability and strength to the building they just made. But the man whose shadow was used for this secret sacrifice is supposed to die within the year because they used his shadow. In many folk tales, the soul appears as a shadow long after the person has died. There are many legends which describe how graveyards are haunted by gray and black shades at night. Shades which clearly have the silhouette of human beings and move around like humans as well. So in some cases, the shadow is seen as an omen of death. The person who encounters such a shadow, like if you're at a graveyard and you see a shadow of a human that's not yourself, you're supposed to die within a few days, or someone you know is supposed to die within a few days. There's this Dutch folk tale where a couple of men are ice skating and think they are being followed by dark spirits. They go faster and faster, but the dark spirits keep chasing them. But as it turns out, at the end, the so-called spirits chasing them are just their own shadows. So there are literally so many old rhymes and folk tales about people thinking their shadows are something dark and scary. There's also this superstition that says if you place a candle over top of your shadow and ask your shadow a question, it might respond. But if you speak to it for too long, it might take over your life because your shadow is just a shade of a human. It wants to become real. So don't talk to your shadow for too long because it might just, become you, which is weird because it kind of is you, but not completely yet. Still, many people today don't feel comfortable amongst their shadow, and so the shadows keep haunting us till death do us part. I was kind of freaked out even doing research for this video because my shadow's everywhere. I see my shadow over there. Alright, so I'm gonna read you guys a creepypasta. It's called My Daughter Talks to Her Shadow. Now, I never read creepypastas word for word because it takes a really long time. I sort of just sum them up for you guys. So here we go. This is about a father who noticed that his daughter was constantly talking to her shadow. And at first he thought that maybe it was some sort of weird game that she was playing. His daughter didn't have any friends and maybe this was her way of coping with that. But it soon started to become a little too strange. She would talk to her shadow for hours and hours on end, and soon it started to take up most of her day. But whenever the father would suggest that maybe she would stop, his daughter would become really angry and would refuse to. One day something incredibly terrifying happened. He was in the kitchen preparing them dinner, and his daughter was in the living room talking to her shadow as she usually did. But something about that particular conversation seemed different. She sounded as if she was trying to keep her voice down, as if they were exchanging some sort of secret she didn't want the father to hear. So he asked her what they were talking about, but she didn't respond. She just kept talking to her shadow. But that's when the father heard it. A low, deep, creepy voice coming from the living room. So he started to look around the house, wondering what the heck it was. He knew it definitely wasn't the voice of his daughter. So he started to think, could it be the voice of her shadow? But he knew that thought was absurd, so he instantly just didn't think about it. A month went by and he never heard that creepy low voice again. But his daughter was still talking to her shadow on the daily. So finally, he decided to take her to see a psychologist. When the father picked her up from her first session, his daughter's eyes were bloodshot, as if she had been crying for a while. But she would not tell him what happened at the appointment. She just kept talking to her shadow. So the father stormed into his room out of frustration, and just as he sat down on his bed, he heard that low voice again. He turned around, and behind him was this tall, gray, shadowy figure that was his exact height and build. He looked at it in disbelief as it started speaking to him.
What's wrong? Can't handle finally seeing us?
The figure taunted him, drawing closer, and its voice sounded exactly like his. So he asked the figure who it was.
You don't get to speak to me or to any of us. Not after the way that you've treated us. All of you have been taking us for granted for centuries.
The shadow suddenly slammed the father against the wall.
And finally your daughter acknowledges us, and the first thing you try to do is stop her?
Without warning, it scratched viciously all across his chest, making him fall to the floor. And ever since then, he left his daughter and her shadow in peace. He canceled future appointments with the psychologist and never bothered her about it again. It's what their shadows would want. And that's how the story ends. So, I guess the story is trying to portray shadows as actual living beings that want to be noticed and acknowledged and spoken to, but they sound kind of violent, and I don't like them very much. So we have talked about shadow people in a video before, and the Hat Man is classified in the group of shadow people. He's kind of a little bit different at the same time. So the Hat Man is a shadow person that has been found all over the world. There are tons of stories of people seeing the Hat Man. As I said before, even you guys have seen the Hat Man. So the entity is usually described as a tall shadow man dressed in a long black trench coat and wearing a wide-brimmed hat or a fedora. He is distinctively male, and witnesses say that he has no face or has a shadowy, blurred face, so you can't really see anything detailed on him. Most shadow entities are usually seen for a moment or two before disappearing, but the Hat Man seems to be different, and he often stays for a prolonged period of time. Sometimes he even touches his victims, which is very, very rare for like ghosts or shadow people. Usually they just freak you out. They don't actually come up to you and physically touch you. Another aspect of the Hat Man that is eerie and more sinister than other shadow people is that the Hat Man is often associated with hostile environments. So I think I've mentioned this to you guys before, but a lot of the time shadow people show up if you're depressed, if you're anxious, if something bad has happened in your family, if you've experienced loss. It usually sort of follows dread and sadness and stuff like that. The Hat Man also seems to take pleasure in the terror he causes, and witnesses have reported the feeling that the Hat Man is somehow feeding off of their fear. Other witnesses have reported that the Hat Man sometimes has glowing red eyes or black featureless solid eyes. I don't know what this was. And others have said that the Hat Man is like a fallen angel. So then underneath this article, there's actually a lot of paragraphs of different people that have seen the Hat Man. It's actually scary how many paragraphs I'm scrolling through right now. Like, it's endless. Like, I'm probably reading past like 200 at this point. Like, for some reason, this is just the most common entity that people see. And I think what freaks me out the most is how it says it's like prolonged, because with shadow people, usually if you're like walking by your room, you'll sort sort of see it on the side of your eye. But apparently with this hat man, when you see him, he doesn't like disappear, he doesn't run away, he like just lingers there. And I actually have a story that I haven't told you guys yet. I think I did mention it on one of my YouNow streams, but it scared me so much that I didn't really want to come on here and talk about it because it was so real. It happened back when I was sick in December. I was really sick. I know I've already made a video about this, but I had been lying in bed for 2 weeks, literally so ill that I could not move. And there was this one night where I was lying in bed and I couldn't fall asleep because I wasn't feeling well at all. And I was just looking around the room, everything was fine, and all of a sudden, at the very end of my bed, there was this really tall, shadowed figure. I couldn't see any detailed on him. I just saw that it was like a man's silhouette. It was so tall and lanky, and it didn't have like an obvious like hat like the hat man does, but where his head was, I mean, it could have been wearing a hat. I'm not too sure. I was just so freaked out by the fact that I saw this figure, and it didn't disappear when I saw it. It just lingered there. And I was so stunned and shocked with fear that I laid there for what felt like minutes looking at it. And then I woke Ty up and I was like, Ty, do you see that? And he looked at me and he's like, yeah. What is that? And we both just lied there in such confusion until it just went away. It was the weirdest thing that I've probably ever experienced. And I mean, maybe I've talked about it on here. I don't remember talking about it on here. I do remember mentioning it on YouNow, but it was very strange. And just to read some of the things that people are saying, it says, I saw him at the age of 5 and never forgot it. The only difference was that the hat man was a glowing orange to red. That's interesting. I haven't heard that before. He came from the door to my parents' room and walked towards me, slowly raising his hand out as to touch me as he got closer. I screamed just before he actually made contact and he disappeared. He had a fedora-styled hat and no halo. Because I guess people are saying like sometimes he could be a fallen angel, which I don't really believe that sort of thing. I believe in angels, but I believe that they're up in heaven and sort of watching over us. Someone said, I saw him while I was at my grandparents' house on the computer. I was 6 years old and I saw him in between the bathroom and the laundry room doors. My aunt even saw him in the middle of the night in her parents' room. He doesn't only come when you're sleeping, and apparently it's a warning sign that something bad will happen to you or your loved one, which like when I saw that figure at the bottom of my bed, I called my mom the next day and I was just crying and I was like, Mom, what if this is a really bad sign? Like obviously it came to me when I was really sick. Like I was actually scared that I was gonna die or something. Like I didn't know what it meant, and my mom's like, Jess, it's okay, just try not to think about it. Like I was so scared that it was a sign that something bad was gonna happen. Wow, so I'm reading that there is a 42-year-old that for the past 10 years, the hat man just continuously finds him in his dreams. So it's almost like every single dream this man has, the hat man invades, which is super creepy. Oh my gosh, I just read one that is so scary. It says, when my brother was little, one time he saw the hat man crawling on the ceiling. He was like 3 or 4 and now he is 20, and he said he will never forget it. And he knows it was the hat man because he remembered seeing the image of the hat man online and he knew right away that that's what he saw. I don't know why, but in like horror movies or anything, whenever like the creepy monster or whatever like crawls on the side of the walls or the ceilings, that always gets me. That is always freaky. It's never the jump scares in horror movies that freak me out. It's always like the weird creepy things that the entity does, you know? Anyways though, I mean there's tons of different experiences from people. So if you guys are ever curious to know other people's experiences, all you have to do is do a simple Google search, and like there's tons and tons to look at online. I would suggest not looking, you know, late at night because you may not sleep. And if you guys are also interested in me reading some of the subscriber stories that sent in how they saw the hat man, I can definitely do one on that. Alright guys, let's get right into it talking about the rake. So this creature is depicted as an ancient humanoid monster that made its first appearance all the way back in the 12th century. It is said to have no body hair, and many depictions resemble an overgrown dog. And the stories about the rake also claim it's over 6 feet tall, his hands are long and sharp, and he's usually seen crawling on all fours. And the most striking feature of the rake is its eyes. There's this really really eerie journal entry that seems to be translated from Spanish in 1880, and it's this man explaining what it was like to look into the eyes of the rake. His journal entry says, "I have experienced the greatest terror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I see his eyes when I close mine. They are hollow, black. They saw me and pierced me. His wet hand, I will not sleep. His voice," and then there's just unintelligible text after that. Then there was another letter found that was written in 1964, and it was written by a man to his love right before he died, and he wrote, "Dearest Linny, I have prayed for you. He spoke your name too." Then there's an even older journal entry. This one is from 1691, and this is the first entry that actually says the creature's name, and it reads, "He came to me in my sleep. From the foot of my bed I felt a sensation. He took everything. We must return to England. We shall not return here again at the request of the rake." So it's really eerie that there are so many historical journal entries of the rake and people seeing him. No thank you. This really freaks me out. This is definitely one of the creepiest things that I've had to research. So let's talk about how it became so popular on the internet. According to the lore, the rake first created an internet stir in 2003 after numerous people in the northeastern United States started sharing sightings of a bizarre creature. Now, the rake was spotted in mostly rural areas, leaving a wake of terror and intrigue in its path. But what's so weird, after all of these people started publicly speaking about this creature, there was suddenly this media blackout where mysteriously all the evidence of this creature was erased from the internet. So it was like the existence of the rake just disappeared for no one to read about or hear about or see pictures of. So people thought that the government was trying to cover it up. So in 2006, a group of internet sleuths decided to gather all the details available about the rake and compiled them chronologically, and this group apparently accumulated nearly 24 documents of people who saw the rake in real life, and some of those documents were the ones that I already read to you, like those really old journal entries. Now, there's also this journal entry that I found from 2006 from a witness who saw the rake. It's really eerie. It says, "3 years ago, I had just returned from a trip from Niagara Falls with my family for the 4th of July, and we were all very exhausted after a long day of driving, so my husband and I put the kids right to bed and called it a night. But around 4 a.m., I woke up thinking my husband had just gone to the bathroom. So I used this moment to steal back the sheets, only to wake him in the process. I apologized and told him I thought that he had got out of bed. But when he turned to face me, he gasped and pulled his feet up from the end of the bed, and then he grabbed me and said nothing. At the foot of the bed, sitting and facing away from us, there was what appeared to be a naked man or a large hairless dog of some sort. Its body position was disturbing and unnatural, as if it had been hit by a car or something. For some reason, I was not instantly frightened by it. I was more concerned about its condition and if I should help it. In a flurry of motion, the creature scrambled around the side of the bed and then crawled quickly in a flailing sort of motion right along the bed until it was less than a foot from my husband's face. The creature was silent for about 30 seconds, just looking at my husband, and the creature then ran to the kids' room. I screamed and ran for the light switch, planning to stop him before he hurt my children, but when I got to the hallway, the light from the bedroom was enough to see it crouching and hunched over about 20 feet away. He turned around and looked directly at me, covered in blood. I flipped the switch on the wall and saw my daughter Clara. The creature ran down the stairs while my husband and I rushed to help our daughter. She was very badly injured and spoke only once more in her short life, and she said, "He is the rake." And that is a very disturbing story because clearly he attacked her children and they did not make it. It is believed that those who look into the eye of the rake are destined to be its prey. Like, once you make eye contact, it's like it for you. He'll either get you or your family. And what's strange is that once you become marked, which is when you look into his eyes, the days following before he gets you, apparently you'll have this very strange reoccurring dream. In the dream, the rake sits at the foot of your bed and silently stares at you, and the story goes that these dreams slowly chip away at a person's sanity until they're too unstable to defend themselves. And even for those who encounter the rake and live to tell the tale, apparently their future is very grim because these poor folks usually lose their minds or end up in a mental institution. And the rake story includes multiple references to Slender Man, perhaps the most infamous creepypasta of all time. Some claim the rake's powers, like seeing into someone's soul, were granted by Slender Man, and others say the rake is actually a proxy for Slender Man. So yeah, all of these stories are really eerie, and I could literally do a whole video talking about people's experiences seeing the rake. So if you want me to do a part 2, I definitely can. Just give this video a thumbs up and let me know. And also comment down below which other creepypasta creatures you would like me to talk about that I never have before. Because although I do a ton of urban legends and creatures, I haven't talked about like the most famous top 10 for some reason, so we're starting now. Okay, so let's talk about the black stickmen and what they really are. So they are a relatively recent phenomenon, and people all over the globe have been encountering what can only be described as two-dimensional stick figures that just lurk around the area. They are very tall, between 7 to 12 feet, and they are incredibly thin and devoid of any noticeable features. Almost as if they were crudely drawn stickmen that came to life and stepped off the page. And because they are two-dimensional, they become almost invisible when viewed from a certain angle. And reports say that their movements are very smooth, but also very unnatural. Reports of feeling dizzy or tired in their presence are also not uncommon, as well as the distinct sense of a sort of static charge in the air, and sometimes a sense of malevolence. Although these entities are not really known to be aggressive, they are usually described as very skittish, and they act almost surprised when they've been seen, usually escaping by creeping off into the night and the darkness, or simply vanishing into thin air. And they reportedly make no sound, and they have no shadow. And they are unlike ghosts in that they are not linked to a certain location because of a tragic death or some sort of awful incident. They simply just appear wherever they want to appear. And they have been appearing to more and more people recently, so keep your eye out. It is also important to know that they should not be confused with shadow people. They are just entirely different beings than anything we've ever known before. And there has yet to be a recorded case of a stick person attacking someone, which I guess is good, or maybe it just hasn't happened yet, but it will. And they have yet to communicate with anybody in any way, not even a sound. And they should also not be confused with Slender Man, who is also a very tall, thin creature. Some people think they are linked to ancient beings depicted in some cave drawings, which some groups believe are signs of ancient aliens or extra-dimensional travelers. So I really wanted to talk about a few of the witness accounts. These are people who actually saw them in real life and reported it. This first case comes from 1978. There's this man named Simon who said that he had an encounter with a stickman in Kent, England, back in 1978. Him and his friends had been sitting in the Luce Valley at midnight, and after about 45 minutes, his friend named Will jumped to his feet and he was slapping his hair, saying there was a bee on his head. He looked absolutely terrified, and when the rest of the group of friends looked behind him, they saw this tall, thin, dark figure wearing a hat just dancing behind him. But they kind of brushed it off as maybe they were seeing something, maybe their eyes were playing tricks on them, and they thought that maybe the loud buzzing they heard coming from the top of his head was just because they sat near a bee's nest. But on their way home, they were followed by that thin figure off in the distance. So clearly this figure had gotten close enough to his friend that he began to hear and feel that static charge that comes from them, and he thought the buzzing was from a bee. Then we have an encounter that happened back in 1982 in Essex, England. By the way, if I sound weird in this video, my nose is super clogged up. I am so sorry. It feels like I'm speaking through a pillow or something. Okay, so this woman said she was a student nurse at Worley Hospital, and she encountered a stick person on the grounds of the hospital as she was walking home one night. She said it lopped across the roadway and it stopped when it saw her and raised its arms in fright and quickly walked off into the undergrowth. She said it was tall and very, very thin. It had extremely long arms and long legs, and it had this oval face with no facial features on it. It was completely black, no obvious clothing, and she was just so freaked out that she could not see a face, especially because it was standing right underneath a street lamp. To this day, she is terrified of this encounter and no one believes her. Then we have one from the early 2000s. This is a story from a man who remembers something very creepy happening to him when he was a little kid. He said that he had gotten out of bed and opened the door, and about 5 feet away from him in the hallway was a tall tall, black, slender figure that was very thin, all black, no facial features. It had a circled head, long legs, long arms, and it made no sounds, and it was almost gliding through the house, taking these huge steps. He said the way it walked was the most scary part about this thing. He saw it for only 2 seconds, slammed the door, ran back into bed, called for his mom. His mom ran in, asked what was going on. He explained it to her, but she just told him it was a bad dream. And what's creepy is that when he woke up in the morning, his legs were completely scratched up by something. He didn't have a cat. He didn't have scratches before he went to bed. When he woke up, he saw them and he thought of that creature. And then we have a witness account from 2004. This is about a girl that would walk to her best friend's house every day after school. She would always see this stick man following them around the house and peeking out from behind her friend's couch. He was all black and would constantly change sizes. Sometimes he was the size of a small cat. Other times he was taller than a man. And she did feel very scared of him. There was something very ominous about this presence. And to her, it felt evil. So one day she decided to tell her friend what she had been seeing. And her friend told her that she had also been seeing it. So both of them had been seeing this creepy dude walking around the house, this tall, thin man. And she always believed that no matter what she did, he was always following her, always watching her. Until when her best friend passed away suddenly their senior year of high school. She had a genetic heart condition. And after this, she never saw the stick man ever again. She believes now perhaps he was some form of Grim Reaper awaiting his time to take her friend, which is super dark and super sad. But guys, this was only 4 witness accounts. I found about 28 online, and I could probably find so much more if I took more time. So if you want me to do a part 2 to this video, give this video a thumbs up and let me know. This type of thing freaks me out so much, and please comment down below if you've ever seen what looked to be like a tall, thin, shadowy figure at some point in your life. Have you ever used just your hand, a light, and a wall to make a shadow figure? Perhaps it was a dog, or maybe a rabbit, or a monster? If so, you've already had some experience with shadow puppets, which, like I said, I feel like we all have at some point. If you haven't, literally turn off the lights in your room, go grab a flashlight, a night light, your phone light, and go try it on your wall. Shadow puppetry, also called shadow play, got its start thousands of years ago in China and India. This unique form of storytelling is the oldest type of puppetry in the world. So before they started to make those creepy marionette dolls, creepy sock puppets, creepy anything with material, they only used their hands or pieces of paper to make shadow. Shadow puppets are figures that are placed between a light and a screen or a wall. Moving them creates the illusion of moving images on the screen. An experienced puppeteer can make figures appear to walk, talk, fight, and dance. So you can literally put on entire hour-length plays with just shadows, which is just so cool to me, but also so creepy because why do shadows scare us so much? Shadow puppetry is a popular form of entertainment in countries all over the world, like China, India, Indonesia, and Turkey. And those places specifically have been very important to the development of this art form of puppetry. And there are so many different types of plays that they put on with different themes depending on where you're from around the world. For example, in China, shadow plays are based on legends and different folk tales that they tell there. In Indonesia, shadow plays tend to be based on religious stories of good and evil. And in Turkey, shadow plays are more lighthearted and humorous, so they like the comedy aspect of things. The first shadow puppets were likely made out of animal hides. Since they were strong and flexible, they allowed the puppeteer to move the puppet easily to create the desired effects on the screen. And the leather material is still a very popular one to make these puppets out of, but obviously the most easy thing to use if you don't have material is your hands. You can make them talk like that. Okay, so we're going to be talking about a very creepy story. This is called the talking hand. Are you surprised about that? Because I'm not. There's a creepy story of a boy that had been seeing a strange shadow hand in his room ever since he was very little. He thinks it maybe started when he was about 2 or 3. He had this nightlight at the very very end of his bed that shone onto the wall in front of him. And one night when he was about to fall asleep, this hand popped up on the wall at the end of his bed. It was just a shadow and it was in the shape of a sideways profile of a head, like this. It just stood completely still there for a few minutes, and just when he was about to call for his mom, it began speaking.
Hey, Timothy!
It said in a very jolly voice. It almost sounded like a clown to him, like very high-pitched and sort of goofy. You know, kind of like it was trying to appeal to a young child, which is very creepy.
Wanna play a game with me?
So the boy nodded his head, thinking that maybe it was one of his parents trying to just like play a joke on him or something.
You just have to come over here and give me a high five.
The shadow told him, but Timothy started to get some bad vibes. He started to feel like something was not right here. He wasn't sure if he could trust it, so he just pulled the covers over his head and fell asleep. This happened for years and years, and each time he would hide under the covers so he wouldn't have to look at it. But one day, when he turned 9, he decided to step out of his bed and walk towards the shadow. He reached out his hand as he approached the wall to touch this shadow figure. And once he did, he turned around to see this bony, gray figure with yellow eyes sticking out from under the bottom of his bed staring at him. He was right in front of the nightlight holding up this long, skinny, creepy arm, and he was holding it out in the shape of a hand and a sideways profile. We had a sneeze intermission right at the good part too. So this thing literally grabs him and pulls him under the bed, and he was never ever seen again. So the whole time it was trying to get Timothy to step out of his bed to walk to the very end so he can go out and grab him and pull him under, which is so scary. He never wanted to play, he never wanted a high five, he just wanted a meal. Okay, and then we have another story called Talk to the Hand. It reminds me of that like phrase, you know, talk to the hand, not the face. And actually that phrase originated from the 1990s. It was said by like a comedian in a show, and then people just started saying it in real life. Some people say like talk to the hand because the ears aren't listening. It's definitely a very sassy phrase. Well, there is this strange story that takes the phrase quite literally. A little girl told her parents that she was able to make a man's face on the wall with the shadow of her hands, which they didn't really seem to find weird because like kids do strange stuff like that. But what she said next actually did start to worry them a bit. She said that she was able to talk to her hands, and they thought that maybe she was just using her imagination to play around. They would hear her upstairs giggling and talking in her room, but one day while her mother was folding laundry, she heard a deep voice coming from somewhere in the house. She became afraid because her husband wasn't home and he was the only man that they knew to live there. So she thought that someone maybe broke in and began running around her house looking around but didn't see anything. So she burst into her daughter's room to see her in the dark with the flashlight pointed to the wall, holding her hands up to create an old man's face. She asked her daughter if she had the TV on, and she said no. And just when the mom was leaving the room, she heard a deep voice begin to sing, "Row, row, row your boat." Like literally she heard,
Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream.
and when she turned around, the shadow puppet on the wall was opening and closing its mouth singing this. And when she looked at her daughter's mouth, it was completely shut. So yeah, that just gave me the complete spooks. I do not like that. Really creeps me out. Takes such like a light-hearted game and makes it just really terrifying. But anyways, that is the end of today's video. I feel like I want to try and do like a creepy shadow puppet play on the vlog channel maybe. Alright, so without further ado, let's get right into this video, first talking about the hidebehind. The hidebehind is a mysterious nocturnal creature from American folklore. It is said to prey upon humans that wander the woods at night, and was blamed for the disappearances of early colonial loggers when they failed to return to camp. Now, 19th century lumberjacks actually had quite a lot to worry about. Physical injury, bears, falling trees, and apparently something called the hidebehind. Early accounts describe hidebehinds as large, powerful animals, despite the fact that no one was able to see them. And as his name suggests, this creature was most known for its ability to conceal itself. On very rare accounts where people have actually been able to see this creature, they say it's very tall and skinny and humanoid. Its body was just so slender, and that's why it was able to properly hide behind trees. People also say it has giant fearsome claws in order to grab its victims instantaneously. If you're walking through the woods and you hear leaves crunching behind you, you feel like you're being followed. If you turn around to look if something is there, the hide behind will go behind a tree or behind any object where you're unable to see it. And then whenever you turn back around, it'll continue to inch closer to you. This hide behind creature basically stalks its prey and is almost invisible to anybody. So people often ask, what do you do to get away from this hide behind? How do you protect yourself? Well, the legend goes that drinking actually helps you. Obviously, if you're of age. No, but seriously, according to the accounts from history, the hide behind hates alcohol. It cannot stand the smell of it, so obviously it's not gonna want to eat someone who is filled with it, you know what I mean? Because then that person would smell like alcohol and it would just repulse this hide behind. So the lumberjacks drank as a way to protect themselves when they thought they might be on the hunting grounds of a hide behind. Now, people say that this hide behind was just a story created to protect lumberjacks. It was a story to keep men vigilant for bears and other wild animals that may be lurking in the woods. It basically helped them keep an eye out to avoid vulnerability. Because if they're just walking through the woods, not afraid, not looking at anything, there's a high chance for injury or for them to be attacked by an animal. But if they're constantly thinking about this hide behind legend, they're kind of keeping themselves safer. However, a lot of people believe this hide behind creature to be very real, and they say to be very careful when you're out in the woods, especially by yourself. And yeah, that's basically the legend of the hide behind. I don't know about you guys, but I had never heard of this legend or creature before. And the thing is, I love forests, so I'm gonna be kind of scared now. Please comment down below if you've ever heard of this creature. All right, next we have this legend called the Dark Watchers. For hundreds of years, people have looked up at the hazy peaks of California's Santa Lucia Mountains at sunset, and they see tall, cloaked figures staring back at them. Is it Santa Lucia? Santa Lucia? I'm so sorry. I'm from Canada. I have no idea what I'm talking about. So as they're looking up at these mountains, people will often see these shadowy figures staring back at them. And then within moments of seeing them, they'll just disappear. These twilight apparitions are known as the Dark Watchers. They're shady, sometimes 10-foot tall men decked out in sinister hats and capes. And apparently people have been seeing these figures on the top of the mountains for more than 300 years. One theory is that they are merely figments of the observer's pattern-seeking minds. In other words, it's something in humans called pareidolia. I hope I'm saying that right. But it's where our minds try to find a specific pattern when we're looking at something. Like, our brains will often see faces and things that aren't actually real. Or like when you're sleeping at night in your bedroom and you see a figure in your closet, but there's not actually one there. That is like your mind playing tricks on you. Other logical reasoning says that spectral figures are usually surrounded by rainbow-colored halos produced by sunlight refracting off the water droplets in the fog or clouds. Now, some say that when you see these figures of these creepy men, it will bring you bad luck. Others claim they are benevolent spirits, while others say they resemble the Grim Reaper. So the next time you're driving up Pacific Coast Highway, take a look out your window as the sun goes down. Perhaps you will catch a glimpse of the Dark Watchers, but don't stare at them for too long. The Dark Watchers just might be watching you. So that's definitely a creepy legend as well. And lastly, we have something called the Platte River Death Ship. The Death Ship of Platte River is the legend of a ghost ship that sails the river. It can be spotted between Torrington and Alcova, Wyoming. And legend says that the mysterious boat is a ship of death and is cursed to sail upon the treacherous river forever. People who have seen this ship say that while they're looking out to the water, they suddenly see this giant ball of mist appear over the water, and that's where the ship comes out of. As the ship gets closer, people have started to see all of the crew members that are on the boat, and apparently they're covered in frost. It is said that if you see the ship of death, the ghost crew will be standing on the deck circling around a dead corpse. Apparently, this ship foreshadows the death of somebody that you know, and the crew is circling that person. So as the ship gets closer to you, they all step away from the body so you're able to see who's lying there. The person will be revealed as someone you know or love, or it might actually be you. that will ultimately meet your fate that day. So you might see your sibling, your parent, your friend, or you might see yourself lying there. And apparently that person will die that day. The death ship was first sighted in 1862. There was a man named Leon Weber who had this encounter. He saw the crew of frosted sailors standing there, and when they moved away, he saw the body of his fiancée. It is said that a month later when he returned home, he learned that his beloved fiancée had passed away the same day that he had seen this ship. So should you decide to search for the death ship, keep an eye out for the spectral vessel during the autumn. Apparently in the fall is when people see the ship the most, and there have been real encounters of people seeing the ship every 25 years or so. You may be the next to witness it, but be beware of the outcome. So yeah, that's definitely a very eerie legend as well. I feel like now I'm gonna be scared anytime I see a boat on a foggy day. No thank you. So the Crooked Man is actually a creepypasta that's been going around the internet for quite a few years, and I find his backstory extremely interesting because it went from something so innocent to something so scary. Back in the early 1800s, there was a poem called "There Was a Crooked Man." It's just an old English nursery rhyme that parents used to tell their kids all the time, and it was published in 1842. Now here's how this old poem went. There was a crooked man, and he walked a crooked mile. He found a crooked sixpence upon a crooked stile. He bought a crooked cat, which caught a crooked mouse, and they all lived together in a little crooked house. So like I said, this poem has been around for hundreds of years, and it was kind of like a fun little bedtime story that parents would tell their kids. There was absolutely nothing scary or wrong with it back in the day. In most of the illustrations, it shows this old man hunched over walking down the road. He looks crooked because of the way his body and limbs are bent. One legend suggests that this nursery rhyme was written about the village of Lavenham in England. It's known for its multicolored houses that lean in irregular angles as if they are supporting each other. So people literally nicknamed this town the Crooked Village, and that's where people think this poem was inspired by. And just a fun fact, apparently there was a poet back in the day that used to live in this village, and that poet actually wrote the poem Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, which we all know very, very well. So I guess a lot of poets came from this town. I mean, to me, this town looks a lot like it came right out of a storybook or a Dr. Seuss illustration, and I feel like it would be so cool to go there in person to see everything, because you don't often see towns that are literally crooked. Just watch out for the Crooked Man if you ever go there. So let's talk about how this old nursery rhyme turned into such a scary creepypasta. They say that if you recite this poem out loud, it will summon a demonic force known as the Crooked Man. So basically, once you recite this poem out loud, the Crooked Man is coming to get you. This creepypasta has its own version of the history of this poem. Apparently back in the 1800s, there was this writer who was researching a whole bunch of folklores and urban legends, and he discovered some lines of verses that occurred in dozens of different cultures and in dozens of different languages, all referring to the same thing. They called it the Crooked Man. So he found out that in dozens of cultures, they had the same sort of creature called the Crooked Man. So this old creepy summoning poem of the Crooked Man was translated to English, and then it was turned into a nursery rhyme by accident. It just became this innocent little rhyme that children were reading and saying. And with that, the Crooked Man was unleashed upon the world, and by the time anyone realized what was happening, the Crooked Man was too real and it was already too late. In my research, I found a warning on a lot of the websites that says once you have summoned the Crooked Man, he cannot be stopped. You cannot hide and you cannot run. He's coming for you. There is no order, no rhyme, no reason. Wherever there is darkness, he will be there. If you read this poem, you have been cursed by the Crooked Man. So apparently the first poem that I read you guys was the OG nursery rhyme from the 1800s. But in this creepypasta, but the rhyme is a little bit different. So I'm gonna read the creepypasta version of the poem that makes him come into my house. And don't worry, he only comes for you if you physically read it out loud. If you're just listening to it or reading it, you're totally fine. So if you're watching right now, don't worry, you're totally fine. It's just me that could be in danger. So here's the alternate version of the Crooked Man's poem. It starts the same as the other one. There was a crooked man who walked a crooked mile, and he found a crooked sixpence against a crooked stile. He bought a crooked cat who caught a crooked mouse, and they all lived together in a crooked little house. But the crooked man was sad, and once he had a thought, why should he be crooked when others they were not? Everything was worthless. He heaved a great big sigh. He didn't want to live life crooked, so he left the world and died. Now the story's not yet over, for this tale is mythed and old. Go hide under the cover, there's something not yet told. For if you've read this poem, it's already too late. The crooked man will find you, and you can't escape your fate. So I'm just looking around my house right now, hoping he's not coming for me. I'm literally home alone. So now I've read like 3 other versions of this poem, so I'm not really sure which one is the correct one. So if you were listening to that and you're like, Jessii, I've heard a different version, that is why. There are kind of a bunch on the internet. But yeah, according to the legend, he's now gonna come for me, so. Now, if you guys have ever seen the Conjuring movies, in The Conjuring 2, they actually had the Crooked Man appear in one of the scenes. And in case you haven't seen The Conjuring 2, I'll just briefly talk about the plot. In 1977, paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren traveled to London, England, where single mother Peggy Hodgson believes that something evil is in her home. When Peggy's youngest daughter starts showing signs of possession, Ed and Lorraine attempt to help the besieged girl, only to find themselves targeted by the malicious spirits. And one of those malicious spirits in the movie is the Crooked Man. Now, in this Conjuring universe, the Crooked Man actually haunts a very old-fashioned toy called a zoetrope. It was invented in the early 1800s and is a cylinder band covered in images on the inside. And when you spin the cylinder with your fingers, the pictures start blurring together and gives it an illusion that they are moving. Now, they didn't have movies and stuff back then, so this really cool device was so interesting to them. So actually, in 1866, the toy company Milton Bradley turned this version into a kid's toy. They made one with replaceable picture strips so that kids could choose what they wanted to see move. Well, in this Conjuring 2 movie, there was a zoetrope toy that showed a crooked man walking along when you spun it, and whenever you played with this toy, the crooked man would be summoned. The film portrayed him in a pretty creepy way with little black beady eyes and a huge mouth with sharp teeth. And apparently the Crooked Man is supposed to have his own movie in the next couple years, which would be so cool. I don't think they've begun filming it, especially because of what's happening in the world right now, but I did find a brief summary of what the movie's gonna be about. In 1980, a young mother buys a zoetrope for her 7-year-old daughter to cope with the death of her husband. Unfortunately for them, the dark spirit that inhabits the toy doesn't play nice. So like I said, it seems like the Crooked Man comes along with this toy. The spirit is like haunting the toy. So yeah, cannot wait for that movie to come out. But anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If I missed any really cool facts about the Crooked Man, definitely comment them down below. And if you have any other really cool urban legends that you want me to cover, you can also comment that down below as well. Alright guys, let's talk about this very creepy sack man. The sack man is a type of boogeyman that is said to look like an impossibly ugly and skinny old man carrying a large sack. He is said to wander the land searching for naughty children, whom he then captures and stuffs them into his bag before taking them away to a grisly fate. Now, many tales say that this sack man actually eats his young victims. And unlike most versions of the boogeyman, the dreaded sack man may have roots in a very real and tragic tale of old. So some people believe that this isn't just a tale of fiction, but instead it's something very horrible that actually happened way back in time. So let's talk about the apparent true story of the sack man. The sack man was likely inspired by a very real man who, during the 16th and 17th centuries, was in charge of collecting orphan babies in order to take them to the orphanages. So he would literally just like take them off the streets and would put them in a huge bag or a wicker basket and would carry them all throughout the province, collecting more and more children on the way. Now, most children usually died before even reaching the orphanage due to the lack of care and obviously the way that they were being transported. It was literally a bunch of kids squished inside this creepy man's sack. So people believe that the lingering memory of this figure may have inspired the boogeyman as envisioned in modern lore. So a lot of creepy legends and creatures actually stem from true stories, as you probably have learned from this channel. Now, there's actually a very similar creature from Spain, and he is called Alhambra del Saco. And he too is depicted as an old man that walks around with a sack and kidnaps children that misbehave. It is said that he walks around the neighborhood during dinner time, looking for children that aren't home on time for their meal. He also offers to take children from parents that think that their sons or daughters are disappointments, which is a super dark and horrible thing for parents to do. Like, your son or daughter aren't living up to your expectations, so you call upon the sack man and he just like throws them in his sack. Why does this creature kind of remind me of Krampus or something? So this creature from Spain also stems from a true story. There was this crime that occurred in 1910 in Spain that inspired this legend. At the time, it was for some reason believed that drinking the blood of a child cured tuberculosis, and there was this man named Francisco back then who had just been diagnosed with tuberculosis. So he went to go and see a healer, and the healer told him that to cure this disease, it would cost him $13,000. So instead, he decided to go and find a child to cure him. So on June 27th of 1910, he found a 7-year-old boy, put him in his sack, carried him off, and then proceeded to mix his blood with sugar, drank it to try to cure his tuberculosis. Obviously, that didn't work. The child perished. People were absolutely horrified. And so this man basically became the boogeyman. And that is where Alhambra del Saco came from. Then there's also another version of this boogeyman from the Czech Republic. And this version is called the bubak. In some tales, the bubak has a pumpkin for a head like an evil jack-o'-lantern, and some say he looks like a dark and creepy animated scarecrow. The bubak stalks the land during the darkness of the night looking for prey, and the creature is being pulled by a cart of cats. So it's literally a group of cats just like pulling him along, and it stares into the night with these horrible dead eyes. And the sack man will only leave his cart to haunt riverbanks and woods, seeking out innocent travelers to place in his sack. And what's so creepy is that this monster can perfectly mimic the cry of a baby, which is apparently the most useful tool to lure his prey towards him, because someone's like walking in the woods, thinks they hear a child screaming, and obviously they want to go and help. It is said that the sack man weaves the souls of those it kills into decaying clothing that it wears on its body. So if it captures you and puts you in his sack, he will later just weave you into his clothes, like you'll become his outfits. Children that the creature catch are placed inside the monster's sack to an alternate existence where the child is aware and paralyzed, yet separated from mortal death. And he apparently only takes them out to weave them into clothing on a full moon. Though the bubak may hunt primarily at night, it's not limited by any means to it. The creature may also be found in crypts, abandoned houses, dark woods, or anywhere that the shadows reign. So yeah, that is another very, very creepy version of this sack man. And like I said, there are so many more around the world. I could literally make this video be like 30 minutes long. So if you want me to make a part 2, definitely give this video a thumbs up and let me know. And also comment down below if your parents have ever told you the tale of the sack man to like keep you in line, because I feel like a lot of people have done that.
In an enchanted realm, an oddity stirs, beckoning the curious. Meet Jessii, once ensnared, now awakened, waiting to be yours.